There are many things which a rabbi does in life, which are what you would consider to be parts of the job. But every rabbi is entitled to have a bit of fun now and again, as long as you don't make it too much of a practice. Rock is my thing. I love rock and roll, always have loved rock and roll. I think it's the beat of life. I probably have been told by too many congregants by now that I'm a frustrated musician in every sense of the word. And I try to make bushy, I try to make my pulpit rock, because I really do think there's so much to learn from the passion and what music is able to convey, and rock music is everything to me. And then you see an individual who has lived rock, an individual who has immersed himself in as a music producer, as a creator of rock and roll camp, someone who has used rock as a platform to motivate and to inspire, someone who's met the greats and has had personal relationships with them. And you think, now this is a guy that's going to be seriously cool. And David Fishof he is a really cool guy. And that alone would give him a platform to be a presenter on the Bushy education series. But someone who happens to be a rock and roll man, who happens to be a really cool guy, who also happens to be a religious Jew. Now that's someone who's going to be an interesting person. So we are really thrilled this evening, not just to talk to a fellow New Yorker, but to speak to someone who can share his life story, all the amazing aspects of it. It is a real thrill for our community, and for all those who are attending from near and from far, to welcome David this evening. And David, it is a real pleasure, and we'll look forward to hearing from you, and also bringing those who are joining us into the conversation a little bit further on. Ladies and gentlemen, a virtual round of applause for David Fishof. Okay, unmute yourself and ready to roll.
Thank you, Rabbi. What a beautiful introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, it really is a pleasure to really be here, because I have this film that I'm hoping you're all going to see. It's called Rock Camp. It'll be available next week on Apple, but I'm going to do a big release in London, all around the world, and it's prompted all these interviews. And the ones that get me the most excited is when I'm talking to Aish, or I'm talking to the shuls and the Jewish organizations, because deep inside I'm a Yid first, and I've been very fortunate to enter this world of rock and roll, and I'm going to share with you some great stories that I think you can enjoy of what it's like to be an Orthodox Jew in this exciting world of rock and roll, and also professional sports. I started my career as a sports agent. And how I dealt with being from. And I think what's been so exciting is that I've been hearing from people in these speeches that I did, the recent speech that I did for Aish, people calling me up and saying, I'm in the music business and I'm afraid to tell my boss that I keep kosher. I'm afraid to tell my boss that I'm Shomer Shabbos, and that I'm not going to go to the shows Friday night. And because people are scared, they're afraid. And I live fearless. And tonight I'm going to share some of those stories for you. And I guess it all starts with me as a child. My father was a chazan. He started in Galveston, Texas, and in Brockton, Massachusetts, and in Hackensack, New Jersey, and went to yeshiva. I went to Breuer's yeshiva, and in Washington Heights. And I have a brother, Joey, who's like you, Rabbi, he's a passionate rock and roller. He's a drummer, and he started a band called the Ruach Revival. He used to play behind Shlomo Carlebach for many years. And my parents wanted him, he wanted to be a rock star. And my parents said, no, you can only play Jewish music. And they were afraid. They were afraid of rock and roll, as most parents are. Joey is He's a rabbi in Boca Raton, and I'll never forget. The other day, Joe Perry was doing a speech I was watching a speech that he was doing at my camp, and I remember he asked Joe Perry from Aerosmith, and he said to to a gentleman, he says, "Tell me about what you." He says, "What do you do for a living?" The guy says, "Oh, I'm a doctor," and then he says, "And on weekends I play in a band," and he said, "I'm a guitarist." So Joe said to him, "Listen, you're a guitarist first. You do that medical crap to buy your guitars." And he says, "Yeah, that's me." And I remember calling my brother and I said, "Joey, if you could become a full-time rabbi, would you give up the rabbin?" He says, "Of course I would. Of course I would." So, Rabbi, I get it. I totally get it. There's nothing like a musician. But anyways, I want to start off with telling you my life. And my dad was a survivor. He survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald. And it's so incredible that I remember that I probably have someone in that town in London whose father and my father were together in the camps. And many of you probably know Zalmi Unsdorfer. His father wrote a book in the 60s called The Yellow Star. In the book, when I was growing up, my whole life, the book basically, talked about how these five guys from Bratislava and Czechoslovakia, how they survived Yiddishkeit and how they survived through Yiddishkeit the camps and the stories of finding of lighting a Hanukkah menorah in Auschwitz. How my father tells a story growing up on how he used to go on the floors and when the Nazis would throw down the cigarettes, he would take the tobacco that was left over, he would make them cigarettes from that, and he would trade them flour so he can make water. And when he was working in Buchenwald in a plane factory, he was able to make matzahs, create his way of doing matzahs. And so that's when I grew up. I grew up every day. Every friend of mine that walked in the house, my father would be so proud to show him this book, The Yellow Star. And so there it was, and that's really what's kept me from this entire life is my father. If my father could be in the camps and he prompted, he stayed from, that was really what is the backbone. Because I'm gonna tell you something, this world of rock and roll, you know, these people, it's a crazy life they lead. Now, I got to meet many of them later in life. And I got to meet them, after, I started representing Ringo Starr, it was in 1989. So they had been through their craziness, a lot of these people, Roger Daltrey with The Who, and we'll talk about them. But I met a lot of these people later in life. So I was able to survive and be able to still be rocking and rolling. Anyway, so my dad, after the war, and he gets liberated from Buchenwald, comes to America, and he becomes a printer. And he goes in a printer. Why a printer? Because that's the business that he learned. He lived as a non-Jew. He lives as a non-Jew in Budapest, and he made false passports for. Those are stories. He made false passports for many people, saved many people's lives. I remember as a kid, he took me to see the Bava Rebbe. And the Rebbe said to me in Yiddish, "My ganze Jugend chakamacha mention Yidden, dein Tat mach me a guy." My father made him a false passport that saved his life. And then he got caught, went to Auschwitz. And so, these stories were just every day. I heard it, I'll leave you one more. Zalmi, there's a story in the book that Zalmi's father says he was standing in line in front of Mengele. And Mengele, they were coming into Auschwitz and there were two lines. And Mengele would go thumbs up or thumbs down. He was looking at the other line, and Zalmi's father was a tall, thin, was very thin, and he wore glasses. And when Mengele wasn't looking at the line, my father pushed his father out of line, and Mengele said, "Where is this guy? Where's that guy with the glasses?" And they couldn't find him. And my dad saved his life, and I know he's built a huge family. And so it was so great that about 8 years ago, we got together, and we hadn't met before. And he had written an article, and my brother told me he met him. So that's where I come from. That's the heart and soul of me. And then he was able to release the book because of Colonel Kemp. But I was raised, and my father was Orthodox. I always say the shuls were conservative and the people were reformed, because we were in these. He started off all these shuls started off Orthodox. He was in Galveston, Texas, and then from there he went to Brockton, Massachusetts, and then I was telling you about my brother had his Jewish rock band, and I always wanted to be in the band, but I wasn't good enough, and so I decided that I was going to write a column for the Jewish press, and I always loved show business. I was going to tell the story of those great comedians like Jackie Mason and Milton Berle and Alan King. I loved those stories and the stories of the Catskills. So I started writing a column called Chevron Entertainment in the Jewish Press, and I have to share this with about the Ruach Revival, my brother's band. They had I don't know if you know, the first Shabbos guy. First Shabbos guy was Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley lived downstairs lived upstairs with his grandparents in Memphis, Tennessee, in Rabbi Fruchter owned the building, and Elvis lived upstairs. And my brother had it in the Ruach Bible. There was a musician called Harold Fruchter, and Elvis used to come downstairs to give Harold guitar lessons, and he was in my brother's band. So, but Elvis would turn off the lights for the Fruchters on Friday night after the meal. And years later, when he made it big, Rabbi Fruchter said they were traveling in San Francisco at the Cow Palace, and they saw a sign, Elvis, working at the Cow Palace. So Elvis goes, and so the rabbi says to his family, "Let's go, let's visit Elvis. Let's see if he remembers us." So they go backstage, and they give the bodyguard, security guard, his card, and he says, "Tell Elvis Rabbi Fruchter's here." And this is before a show. And all of a sudden, the colonel comes out with Elvis's bodyguard, and they say, "Please come in, Rabbi." And there's a picture in Albert Goldman's book of Rabbi Fruchter and Elvis and the colonel. And so I don't know if I teach you one thing tonight. The first Shabbos going in rock and roll was Elvis Presley. And then so going back to me, I wanted to be in my brother's band. I couldn't be in there, so I started working in the Catskill Mountains. And I know many of you have been to the Catskills before, but I think it's the hardest place for an entertainer to entertain, because you get 3 meals a day. I know you have like Bournemouth. I know you have your Bournemouth. I've stayed at a hotel once years ago there, where they feed you 3 meals a day, and then the comic has to get up there and make you laugh. And that's why the greatest comedians came out of there, because it's unlike where you bought a ticket to see a show. So guys like Jackie Mason, who I know is loved there, Jack Carter and Milton Berle, they all came from the Catskills. And I was booking them in the Catskill Mountains. And then and my client, Herschel Bernardi, I met him through my interview with the Jewish Press, and he basically said, "David, get out of the Catskills." He says, "You could do bigger." And I wanted to find a way to get out of the Catskills. So I interviewed a baseball player named Ron Bloomberg, who played for the New York Yankees. And I was writing this column, and I asked Ron if he would make an appearance at a camp in the Catskills. And because the Catskills was always having these athletes show up to these camps and sign autographs and do exhibitions for these kids. And so I took him on as a client. I got him as a client, and I started representing many of the New York athletes. And Phil Simms, he was a quarterback of the Giants, and Lou Piniella, the Yankees. And I started really in the music business and in the sports business. And it was very interesting, because I share this I was negotiating a contract for a player of mine named Dave Magadan, who's currently the hitting coach, he's a baseball coach for the Colorado Rockies. And I go to learn every morning, and I davened at the Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan, and I made sure that I would go have a shiur once a week with Rabbi Rudansky. I would have a shiur with him. So Rabbi Rudansky, we would meet Friday mornings and go and learn Gemara after Shacharis. And he turns to me and he says, "You're not focusing. Something's wrong. What's going on with you this morning?" I said, "I got to be honest with you. I was negotiating a contract um, for Dave Magadan, who was a free agent in baseball. And Magadan and the team offered me 600,000, and the newspaper is saying he's going to get $1 million. And I'm scared to go back to the client and tell him, that they made such a low offer." So he says to me, "Can I help you?" I said, "You want to help me, Rabbi?" He says, "Yeah, I can help you. You let me know what I need to do." So I said, "Okay, let's learn. If you're going to help me, I'm going to focus on the Gemara." And afterwards, we go to my office, and I explained to him what I need to do to negotiate this contract. I said, in sports, in baseball, it's almost very Talmudic, because you have to compare players to another player. And um, make a long story short, you have to really show why this one player is worth more, who's making 2 million, why your player should be making, close to 2 million. And this was a time during baseball where there was arbitration. So in baseball, they reward you for playing more and more years. Anyways, I go and I give him all the facts. We look at Dave McAnan, and I said, I need you to compare him, why he deserves to make 1,500,000, and show me the better number, because we were going through this arbitration process, and the way it works in baseball in America is that the arbitrator team chooses a number, and the arbitrator and the player chooses a number, and there's no number in between. You either choose for the arbitrator, or you choose for the player or for the team. So I was hoping that I would have to go through this process, and the team would just give me the money and give me $1 million because the guy had a great season. Well, they didn't offer that. So he does all the studying. He comes back to me a week later, and he says, I did it. I did the research, and you won't believe it. Dave McAnan really deserves to make $2 million because his numbers are incredible. He got hits when the score was 1-1. He made the score. His hit made it 2-1. The team was down 7-6, and he tied it up. He was amazing. I said, okay, come on, Rabbi, we're going to negotiate with the Mets. And I take him to meet the Mets. And he walks in with all these books, all these comparison books. And I walk into the general manager's office, and he says to me, who's this? I said, this is my rabbi. And we're going to show you why Magadan deserves 1,500,000. And, they didn't want to pay him more than 600. So he goes, he says, so I said, Rabbi, start telling. And Rabbi Rudansky goes, Magadan, he hit 62 RBIs, and he starts talking like it's Gemara Lushan. And all of a sudden, the general manager said, wait a minute, Fishof. This is what's going on here. I said, the rabbi has to leave. I said, the rabbi is going to leave if your assistant general manager leaves too. His name was Steve Phillips. He's currently a TV star. He says, and then we could talk. And I'm going to show you why you're going to pay Magadan $1,500,000 or $2 million. So he says, no one's leaving. So Rabbi goes on, and he starts talking again like it's the Gemara. And all of a sudden he decides he's going to stop. And he says, okay, let him leave. And he walks away. Okay, Fishof, I'll give you the $1 million. I said, no, you're not going to give me the $1 million. I want 1,500,000 now, because I really did all this work, and I'm willing to go to the arbitration. Oh, I'll give you 1,100,000. I'll give you 1,200,000. And I said, no. It's 1,500,000, or else it's not going to happen. So I'm going to fight you in arbitration. I did all the work. I know why I can beat you. And at the end, I settled with 1,450,000. And he says, get out of my office. And he gave me the 1,450,000. Now I had to call Magadan and say, and I said to him, Dave, you wouldn't believe it, but I got you 1,450,000. And he says, David, every agent was calling me, trying to steal, getting me to leave you. And they told me to get me $1 million. How did you get me 1,450,000? I said, I got a rabbi. And who helped me? And it's so interesting. The Gemara, so the baseball contracts are so just like Gemara. They're so Talmudic. And I used to use all these great guys from YU to help me negotiate my baseball contracts. Well, I went on to represent these ball players, but you know what? It was fun, and it is fun. But the problem was that in my heart, I was sharing office space with Shep Gordon, who is the manager for Alice Cooper and Teddy Pendergrass. And across from me was another nice Jewish guy named Gary Kerfis. And he had the Ramones, and he had Blondie, and he had B-52s. And what I didn't enjoy, all my business was show me the money. And I wanted to get into business where it was creativity. They all had gold records on the wall, and everybody was, and they were creating records and tours, and I was just negotiating contracts. So I decided that I was going to get into the music business. And how was I going to do it? I would, in my interviews, when I would be interviewing for these sports contracts, I'd say I'm an entertainment agent. And one day I got a phone call, and someone asked me if I wanted to represent the association. I said, the association of what? And the association was a band in the 60s that did songs like Cherish, Windy, Never My Love. And I remember these songs from the doctor's office, but they were big hits here. And I picked them up as clients, and everyone said to me, I'm Meshuggah, why are you taking on this oldies band? You got 35 ball players. I said, I want to be creative. I wanted to, while I wanted to come up with ideas. And I took this group in 1984 and I put them together with the Turtles. Put them together with the Herman Hermits and the Grassroots. And I put a package in called the Happy Together Tour. And I put them on the road. And I went to William Morris and we started with 15 shows. And then all of a sudden, it turned out to be 125 shows. I did it a year later. And then I decided that I was staying in a hotel and I saw the Monkees on television. And I said, wow, I remember the Monkees. And that was the only show my parents would let me watch. And, coming in yeshiva, they'd let me watch one show a week, and that was the Monkees. So I loved the Monkees. And I got a hold of Peter Tork, and I asked him to come see one of my oldie shows. He came, he loved it, and he says I could take you over to England, and you can meet Davy and Mickey. And so I came over to London, and I always stayed. Now I'll change hotels, Rabbi, but I always stayed at the Montcalm Hotel for all those years because Marble Arch has that chakras in the morning, and they have free breakfast. So I could go there and feel at home. I always stayed. I stayed there, and I signed Mickey and Mickey Dolenz, and I went up north to see him. Then I went down south to see Davy, and I signed the Monkees. I got the name. Now, this is a credible thing. They didn't own the name, the Monkees. I got the name from. I called the president of Columbia Pictures in Los Angeles, and I said, I understand you own the name, the Monkees, that logo, that guitar logo. And he said, yes, but he says, you got to call a guy in New York. I called the guy in New York, and he says to me, Fishof, I know you as a sports agent, take me to a Yankee game. I take him to a Yankee game, and he basically sells me. He says, what do you want? I said, I want to just get the Monkees logo. And he says, listen, what do you want to give me for it? $3,500, I'll give you the name. And he gives me the name for the year. Now, unbeknownst to me, I was going to do a package. I put together a show of the Herman Hermits, Gary Puckett and Union Gap, and I forgot one other band. I think it was the Grassroots, and I was going to tour the Monkees. And I rehearsed, by the way, I rehearsed all my shows at the Concord Hotel in the Catskills, because this way I can eat kosher food. And the late great promoter Bill Graham used to hang out there every summer. He was the number one promoter, and he's a Holocaust survivor. He was a waiter up there. So I used to go and hang out in the summer and warm up my shows there. So unbeknownst to me, I'm on the 7th floor of 7075 Broadway, and on the 8th floor is a network called MTV. And I'm going up and down the stairs with the president, and they decided they were going to show the Monkees for 24 hours. And they did. And I went on sale with my Monkey show, and I sold 40,000 tickets in Chicago, 30,000 in Detroit. The whole country in 1987, 86, 87, they went nuts over the Monkees because these little girls would wait in line, and their mothers would say, where were you all night? I was waiting for Monkey tickets. And mommy said, well, I want to go. They didn't realize the band was 20 years. So that was my start in the music business. And I liked it because I could be creative. And so after I did that, I produced Dirty Dancing as a live tour. Dirty Dancing was the movie. I remember it from the Catskills, and I came up with this idea to produce a live tour of the dancers and the other stars. So I was producing this tour, and it was huge. And what I did was I put a full page ad in the New York Times, and I sold out 8 nights at Radio City. It was incredible. And one day I get a phone call. I'm bringing the tour. Everyone's calling me all around the world to do the tour and bring it to them. I get a phone call from a promoter in Germany, Israeli promoter. He says to me, David, he says, it's Marcel Avram. He says, you know me, I live here in Germany. I promote Michael Jackson. Well, I want you to bring Dirty Dancing. I said, I appreciate it, Marcel, but I'm not bringing Dirty Dancing to Germany. I grew up, I wasn't allowed to have any leather coats, nothing made in Germany in my house. I couldn't drive the Mercedes, nothing. That's where I was raised. And I said, I'm going to pass. I'm not going to sell to Germany. And he said, I'm going to offer you $500,000. I said, no, I'm not selling it. And then a week later, I get a call from another promoter, and he says to me, I want to buy Dirty Dancing, and I love Jewish people, and would you sell me the tour, and I'll give you $750,000. I said, no, I'm not doing it. And so I said, I appreciate it, but I can't do it. And then I get a call from Michael Jackson's lawyer, and he says to me, I have a client of mine. he's a promoter, and everyone knows in the business that you're not selling Dirty Dancing to Germany. And I said, you're right. He said, but just meet with him because I'll get paid. I'm a lawyer, and I get, he's one of my clients. The guy comes to see me, and he says, listen, I'm willing to give you $1 million to bring Dirty Dancing. And I said, $1 million, I'll think about it, but I'm not going to probably do it. I go home that night. I called my father. I said, Dad, I said, you're going to be so proud of me. You're so proud. I turned down $1 million from Germany to bring the tour there. And my father says to me, "Die bist Michigan, nimm the Geld." He said, "Take their money." And I called the guy back. I said, "Okay, for $1.3 million, we'll do it." And we went back and we did Dirty Dancing in Germany. I stayed for a day. And then I called my wife. I said, "We got to go to Israel. This is crazy. I can't stay here for a day." I was afraid to take a shower there. It was my first time. I was scared. And I remember the promoter saying to me, "I overpaid you. Can I have a break?" And I said, "We'll see." And I'd rather give the money to tzedakah. But anyways, make a long story short, I did Dirty Dancing in Germany, and played it all around the world. And then the way my business model was, I would always get corporate sponsors. And President of Pepsi came to see me, and he said, "Would you?" Would you give us an idea? It's the 25th anniversary of the Pepsi generation. And he said, why don't you come up with a concept that I can sell, do a tour. And that's when I had the idea to do Ringo and the All-Star Band. And I wanted to I wrote a letter to Ringo Starr, and it took me about 3 months to get in to see him. And his lawyer said, come over to England. And again, the Montcalm was my home. And I remember staying in the room because back then we didn't have cell phones. And he said, listen, I can't guarantee you when you're going to get in there. Come in on Monday, and maybe Friday, one of these days I'll get you in there. And so he calls me up Thursday night. He says, Ringo can see you Friday morning. And so I went in to pitch Ringo, and I said, I have this idea to take you and put an all-star band around you. And he said, oh, I was thinking the same thing. And as I'm walking out, his business manager at the time, a gentleman named Hillary, turns to me and he says, I made the pitch to him, and he says to me, I was raised from, he says, my mother's Orthodox and she goes back and forth to Israel. And he says, I'm not from anymore. I'm not Orthodox. I'm atheist, but I'm going to put a good word in for you. And that's how I eventually got Ringo Starr to be a client. And I did the All-Star Band with him. I created this whole great band around him. I put Joe Walsh in there, Levon Helm of the band. And after the fourth show, I turned to him. It was a Thursday night, and he was working. I think we were in Buffalo, and he says to me, I said to him, Ringo, I'm going to go home and spend the Sabbath for my family. And he says to me, remember you told me that you were going to be with me the whole time. I said, well, that's agent talk. I'm not traveling. I never went on the road with these bands. I would go home because Shabbos, I had to be home for Shabbos. And but I'd go home and I'd come back out a week later or 2 weeks later, and he says, well, you got to, can't you celebrate the Sabbath in Buffalo? And I said, well, I try to find a million excuses. Well, anyways, to make a long story short, I've ended up being on the road with him for 8 weeks, and then throughout Japan. And I've learned to spend every Shabbos in a different city. Because, when I was representing him and producing these tours, I realized when my show was in Kansas City or was in Chicago, that's where my business is. So you have to be there with these stars. So I changed his rider. I put in his rider is like, all these rock stars have in their contracts that you have to feed them this and you have to feed them that and you have to have this equipment and that equipment. In my rider for Ringo, I'd say he needs a car at 7 o'clock in the morning every morning after the show, because what it did for me was it got me to go to a minyan in every city, and that's what I would do. I would try to find a minyan in every city. I found I remember I was saying Kaddish one year for my late father, and I called every Jewish restaurant in town, and I said, come on, I'll give you 10 tickets, get me 10 men, and we'll have a minyan. And I have pictures of minyanim I had backstage at the shows. I always felt that, the artists, either they're going to accept me, they're going to like me. But even when I was representing the ball players, I attracted a Christian ball player, a player that loves family. It's like Phil Simms, his father said to him one day, he said, find yourself a Jewish boy. They know how to make money. So it was always that respect that I had with these people, and I felt that if my dad could survive, and he would, and he all he talked about, it's going to keep. It really is my inner strength. Um, and some funny stories. I'll never forget the phone. Would ring. Phone rings at Havdalah every time. It was time to Shabbos was over. Um, the phone would ring, and my daughter would run to take the phone, and she would put the phone up to the to what I was saying, Havdalah, and it was my mother, and it was Bubby calling to hear the Havdalah. And so one day, phone rings right after Shabbos, and my daughter grabs the phone, and I do Havdalah, and and then all of a sudden, my daughter picks up the phone and says, "Hi, Bubby, it's me, Sharon," and he says, "Oh, this is Ringo," and Ringo, and yeah, Daddy, you better take it. I said to Ringo, "How did you know to call me at 6:09 on Saturday night?" He said, "Well, I'm here in Nashville, and I called the local Reform rabbi, and he said Sabbath will end at 6:09. You can call him then." So he got to hear my Havdalah. Years later, he came to my house for a Shabbos meal. He came because I kept talking about Shabbos. I guess he wanted to see if there really is, they always say I was turning into a pumpkin. He came, and my son-in-law, who is a rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Einhorn, and he was a YU graduate, and I turned to him, and I said to him, "Listen, Ringo's coming, prepared Dvar Torah for him," and because he always did Dvar Torah Friday night. And my daughter, and I'll never forget, my daughter calls me up, "Dad, we have to make sure we're going to wash." And I said, "We're going to wash. We're going to do Dvar Torah. We're going to sing Zmiras, everything. Don't worry." He wants to see that. So he comes to the house, and we go to wash. And he says, "I like this. I like the family together." He loved that feeling. And then Shlomo gave a Dvar Torah on the trup. He talked about musical notes, the trup, and why we use musical notes. And then we started singing Zmiras. And we started singing Shlomo Kalbach, Zmiras Friday night. And it's just so it's cool to see here. I was thinking Shlomo Kalbach's in heaven. If you could only see a beetle he was tapping on the table, hearing the Zmiras. And so it was, very, very cute, and it was fun. And they got to see, so they realized what I'm about. And I remember forget taking him to, he called me up one morning. He said to me, "David," he said, "Wait, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to the Minyan," and we were in Gothenburg, Sweden. And Gothenburg, Sweden, we were rehearsing there. And so he says, "I'm going to come with you." He wanted to come. He'll come quietly, and they wouldn't know. We show up to a shul in Gothenburg, Sweden. There's a 10 Yidden, and me and Ringo walk in, and the first thing, the guy comes over to me, and he welcomes me, and the first thing he turns to me, he says, "Is that Arafat? He looks like Arafat." He thought he was Arafat. And then, the second thing was, he says to me, "As a Kohen, is he a Kohen?" I said, "No, no, he's not a Kohen. As a Levi, it's not a Levi. No. As a Yisrael," I said, "No, no, he's not Jewish, but he wants to sit here and pray a little." And and it was, so what do you think the next question was? I told him that he was a rock star. We're here in town for a concert. Can we get some free tickets? They was all these. They wanted to come to see the show, but it was during my time I did 15 years with him. And my other favorite story was, I got a call from the Schottenstein family. Jay Schottenstein called me. He built an arena in Columbus, Ohio, and he says he has a secretary called me up, and his assistant who books his arena. And they just built this big arena in Columbus, Ohio. And he says, they called me up and said, "Can Ringo play the first show at the Schottenstein Arena?" And I said, "You tell Mr. Schottenstein that if he wants Ringo Starr, I want a set of Gemaras." And so the jokes. So they called me back the next day. The lady called me. I said, "He'll give you a set of the Gemara, and he wants to give one to Ringo too, but he has to take a picture of Ringo Starr holding the Schottenstein Talmud." So I go to Ringo, and I said, "Do me a favor, when we come into Ohio State to the arena, do you mind taking a picture with the Schottenstein family holding the Talmud?" And I explained to him what it was. And back then, Madonna was all over the news with Kabbalah, Kabbalah, Kabbalah. So he said, "Yeah, I'll take a picture." And we go into this room, we take a picture, and it's Ringo and I'm going to show you the picture. It's on my wall, but it's Ringo holding the Gemara, turning to the family, said, "I've never seen David so happy getting a free set of Schottensteins." And But I said, give him a brachos only, and so he has one, and he was very respectful. I find all the artists they've been respectful to me. And then after while I'm doing Ringo, I came up with this idea to do the British Rock Symphony. I came over to London, and I did an album with the music of the Beatles, the Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and the Who, and I played all your castles there, and at Royal Albert Hall, and it's a great project that I did, and I got all these big stars from Alice Cooper to sing on it, sing a Beatles song, and what else did I get? I got Alice Cooper sings on it, Paul Rogers sings on it. Um, Let me see who else. Oh, I love that guy from Whiter Shade of Pale, Gary Brooker. He sings on the album, and I started playing this tour all around the world. And so all of a sudden, one day, my phone rings, and I get an email. Back then, was an email. The show was booked in Melbourne, and someone wrote me an email, and he said to me, "Does he says, what time? When does Alice Cooper go on stage?" Saying Saturday night, Melbourne. A guy's asking me a question. I said that in my mind, that guy's got to be a from guy. So I wrote him back. I said, "Can you send me the minyanim list of all Australia? And does your wife can she make cholent and potato kugel?" And he wrote me back and he said, "Yes." He says, "Of course." He says, "We want to come to see the show, but we're not sure what time Al is going on." So I said, "Well, listen, you'll come to the rehearsal on Friday, and I'm going to come to you for Shabbos." And we've struck a great friendship, and so that was very cute. And over the years, I've been able to. I am who I am. I was representing the band after my first Ringo tour. I started taking on the band, and that's Levon Helm, and he was in the band, and Rick Danko, and so I got a call from Roger Waters, and he said to me, "David," he said, he says, "I want the band to perform. I'm redoing The Wall in Germany, the famous album, and I want to and I want the guys from the band." So I said, "Fine," and I said, "And you'll send us plane tickets," and they gave him the price. Spoke to his assistant, and they sent me 2 first-class tickets, and it's on a Monday. I think it was on a Tuesday. Um, I get a phone call. A friend of mine calls me up and says, Mordechai Ben David is going to be in Manhattan, and he wants to come say hi. I had talked about him in an interview. A Rolling Stone had done a story about me, and they asked me, are you a Beatle fan, a music fan? And I said, no, I listened to the London Pirchei. Yigal Salek was one of my heroes, but so I like the Pirchei music. I love Jewish music. I said, Mordechai Ben David, Avram Fried. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was on tour all these years, I would go back to my room and I'd put on the Jewish music because that reminded me, hey, you're a Yid. You're a Yid. Everybody else go to the bar, they go hang out. Jewish music really kept me from. I'm on the road, and I know if I'll never forget. I used to have my headphones on because here I'm traveling with all these rock stars, and sitting in the back, and they even wanted to play a joke on me. I mean, if you see, I have the film coming out. There's a joke about I'm at the Garden State Art Center in New Jersey with my first Ringo tour, and I put together an amazing band for him. And all of a sudden, you see Clarence Clemens of Bruce Springsteen's band walks by and he says, "Fishof, I'm quitting." And I said, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, Nils Lofgren, he walks by my table and he says, "I'm also quitting this tour." Now, I had mortgaged my house. I had a townhouse in Manhattan. I mortgaged my house to sign Ringo and to do this tour. And because, I'm a promoter, I take chances. That's what we do. We're promoters. That's what we do. You have the very famous Harvey Goldsmith in your town. You risk, you take risks. That's what we do. And we love the business. We love the arts, but we have to take chances, promoters. So I said, well, let's go find Ringo. I said, I had a 30-city tour booked, and all of a sudden I can't, let him to deal with these guys. I'm not going to deal with them. And they said, no, you got to go in the room and you have to sort it out. And I walk into the room, and there's Joe Walsh for the Eagles with a knife and blood in his hands, and Levon Helm with a glass bottle and blood. And and they're screaming at each other. They're fighting over songs, and everyone told me this Ringo All-Star Band would never work because, it's one thing you do a one-night concert, but to do a concert for 30, 6 weeks or 3 months on the road with all these band leaders and one band, it's not going to work. And they're pushing each other, and all of a sudden I walk in there. I said, "Are you guys a bunch of babies? What are you doing?" And they both turned around and pushed and threw the knives, and they had blood, and they both turned around and they stuck their tongue out at me, and they thought it was funny. I almost had a heart attack because I thought my house was going to go down the river, but they were playing a joke. They were playing a joke on me, and in the end, I started representing Levon and Joe. And if you go to YouTube, you'll see Ringo star David Fishof. You'll see the story, but it's in the film, and that's what prompted me to do this film, Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, Rock Camp. But I'll never forget. So I'm doing this tour and I'm representing the band, and going back. So all of a sudden, Mordechai Ben David comes to my office, and he starts talking to me, and we start talking what I'm doing, and the phone rings. It's the tour manager for the band. They're in Germany. They're in Germany already, and and they're there, and and he calls me up. He says, "David, you won't believe it. The show is taking place on top of Hitler's bunker on the Berlin Wall, and our offices are in the bunker." And I said, "Oh, well, that's exciting." And then I put down the phone. He said, "I'll pick you up on Friday morning, and you're flying in." I said, "Okay." And I hung up the phone. And Mordechai Ben David looks at me, he says, "Forget going to Germany." He says, "I'm going to come to Israel with me. I'm doing shows in all around. Come with me. I'll show you Israel like you've never seen before." And in back those days, I took my 2 first-class tickets, and I gave it to my secretary. He says, "I'm going to Israel, and send me the change these into 4 coach tickets, and I'm going to take my family." I went to Israel with Mordechai, and it was incredible. I mean, he gave me such a life-changing experience. We went to the mikveh every morning at 5 o'clock. We went to Basikin at the Kotel. We went to learn, and I just watched him do all this chesed there, and his concerts and singing and working with cancer kids. And it gave me more. I was a route Jew. I was a route Jew. I would do it. I would keep kosher. I'd go to minyan, but I wasn't. I didn't feel it, and he got me to really feel my Yiddishkeit, and it really took my preference over all my work, because you get caught up in this business, and it is very exciting. There's no question. You're flying first class, you're flying in private planes, you're living in hotels, but deep inside, it's not what it's not what you aspire to do. My kids are, I have children. I didn't want to raise them in LA. I wanted to raise them in an environment where in New York, and keep them in yeshiva, and that's always been, it's been a battle. And you don't want that Yetzer Hara all the time. And believe me, it comes, and it comes in droves. And you just got to fight it all the time. And so what I did was that I went to Israel, and I really got really he strengthened my Yiddishkeit. And I will say that it really was my life changing to learn every day, and to go to minyan, and just keep my Yiddishkeit goes first. And I used to I mean, whether I got to shul and I left early because I didn't want anyone asking for tickets, or it was just so many different things that I had to deal with. But I'm proud to say that, today there's so many Orthodox Jews. The head of Warner Brothers Films is a guy named Steve Spurrier. He walks around with a yarmulke every day. And when Clint Eastwood was thanking for the Oscars, he thanked Steve. Everyone watches the Kardashians. My intern is Gil Goldstein. He's the executive producer of the Kardashians. He's the president of YIC. He's the president of a yeshiva here. Some of the biggest writers, Jeff Astroff, who writes all the shows, Friends. These writers have an issue. Matisyahu, he tried it. But again, living on the road is not the way. It's not. It's hard. It's hard to live on the road and stay from. So that's when I made the decision that after 15 years I was going to do the Ringo. I decided. I got married again. I met this amazing woman. She walked into my house on a Shabbos meal, and she was a Duran Duran groupie. Rabbi, you won't believe it, a Duran Duran groupie who's a Baal Tshuva. And she knew more about rock and roll than I did. And so I said, because it was always hard. I wanted to find I had to find someone that can make a cholent, but that can rock and roll. Not a lot of people can fall into that. But I met this wonderful woman, Karen, and together we have I have three children, and I have seven grandchildren, and I also have and then I got married to Karen, and we have two teenagers. I have a son, Mordechai, who's named after my dad, and he's Mordechai ben David Jr. We call him, and he's got payas, and he learns Gemara every day, and he's a really Talmud Chacham, and he's just a great kid. And my daughter goes to Beis Yaakov, and so I've always I wanted them to see that to be from it and to keep it, so what's interesting is, my son-in-law became the rabbi in a shul. You'll enjoy this, rabbi. He became the rabbi, and he gets a smicha from YU, and he gets a job at the West Side Institutional in Manhattan. And it was like a shul that had 10 people. It was the oldest shul in Manhattan, and all these rabbanim told him not to take it. No, don't take that job. Don't take it. It's the worst shul. The balabatim, and being a father, having a dad and a chazan, balabatim, but I said, you take it. And he says to me, well, why? I said, well, hey, I want to see my grandson every day, and I'll help you. And so, we'd go to Minyan in the morning, and after Minyan, him and I would go back and forth. And he says to me one day, so what am I going to do here? This is a huge shul. There's no one in the audience. There's no one here on Shabbos. There's 10 people. I said, we're going to do rock and roll on Shabbos. That's it. You're going to give Divrei Torah about Bob Dylan. You give Divrei Torah about Led Zeppelin. And I'm going to invite some rock stars to come on a Friday night, and we're going to do some Q&A with them. And I grew up, Leslie West came, and the president of different record labels came, who were Jewish. And every year we did this Friday night, and it was so funny because and the people started coming. They started coming because he would tell them, he would get them into the titles were Jacob's Ladder, or Jacob's Ladder was one of his titles, and Stairway to Heaven. But it was really Torah. He was teaching Torah, Shlomo. And we built the shul up. He went from 10 yidden to 500 every Shabbos, and it's rock and roll. That did it. And so one day I said to Roger Dolce, I said, would you come to my son-in-law's synagogue on a Shabbos lunch, on a Sabbath lunch, and just come? He said, well, I'll come. He says he was living 2 blocks away. He was in New York, and he says he comes, and he came for the lunch, and the place was packed, and Shlomo gave a whole divrei Torah on the words that he wrote in his songs that he did, and then Roger got up there and spoke, and he spoke for about 45 minutes talking about charity. Roger's so involved in teen cancer, in the teen cancer charity, and that's really been his life now. He raises money for teens who have to get cancer treatments, and they don't want to go to they don't have to go where babies go or where seniors go. And this has been his love and his passion. And he talked about charity, and he talked about, I'll never forget, someone asked him, how do you know you made it? And he said, when I would walk the streets in London, he says, when I was and we were all walking the same way, it felt, but then all of a sudden I started walking the streets, and everyone was coming to me and recognizing me. And he's been a great friend, who has been, he's been a great friend, and he helped motivate me to do this rock and roll fantasy camp. And I'll leave you with a couple more stories, but I remember doing a camp in Abbey Road Studios, and Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones was there. He shows up 10 o'clock in the morning, he stays till 10 o'clock at night, and then he stays till 6 o'clock at night. And I said, Bill, I have to go and for Sabbath. And he turns to me and he says, isn't the Sabbath start 6 o'clock? And isn't the Sabbath end 6 o'clock? In Los Angeles. So anyways, it's been interesting. I will leave you with this one great story, because in America, we just celebrated the Super Bowl. and we'll talk of questions. And again, I hope you see my film, because in the film you see the guys from Queen being interviewed with the Gemaras behind them. I wear my yarmulke in the film. I tell Holocaust stories, and I tie in the rock and roll. But this is my favorite story that I want to share with you. It was 1986. It was the New York Giants are in the Super Bowl, and they're playing against the Denver Broncos. And it was my quarterback, Phil Simms, playing against John Elway. And the Broncos were favored by 8 points to win the Super Bowl. And all the publicity was on John Elway, John Elway, John Elway. And Simms didn't really get much publicity. And but he called me up and he said, "Listen, I need you to come down here." And because then we would make all these deals, and what shoes to wear. And so he says to me, I turned to him and I said, "It's Friday afternoon." I said, "Phil," I said, "I'm going to go up to LA and stay in the Pico Robertson area for Shabbos." And he used to always call me up and say, "Don't forget to take your Shabbos shower." And this was the biggest game of his life, the Super Bowl. And I said to him, "I'm going to leave you now. It's Friday afternoon." And Phil Simms turns to me the Friday before the Super Bowl and he says, "Fishof, don't worry about it. Your Sabbath is more important than the Super Bowl. Go enjoy." And I never forget that Sunday he went out and he broke every record of any quarterback, and they won by 9 points. They beat the Denver Broncos. And I always say, if a guy can tell me to observe Shabbos and how important it is and to respect me, then we all Yidden can we should all be able to celebrate Shabbos. So I want to take some questions. It's really great I wish I could be there in person. I am going to come to you guys one day and spend Shabbos, because I think it would be great to spend Shabbos with you, Rabbi.
Unbelievable, David. Really, absolutely. I mean, well, it sounds like you've had a boring life, but besides for that, goodness. I would say that the idea of a rock and roll Shabbat is certainly something that we are going to now adapt and see how that rolls in Bushy. What an amazing idea! I'm not sure we'll have room for 500 people, but I'd love those type of problems. We only have a couple of minutes to open up the floor for questions. Anyone have any questions for David Fishof, the Rock Man? Anyone, please feel free either to raise your hand, to unmute yourself, or to put in any questions. But just as everyone is kind of warming up, I know that you said that you really have not had any issues whatsoever with expressing your religious beliefs and the fact that they respected them. But what about the Jewish rock and roll people? Was there any tension for those who maybe they felt they were being judged, or maybe they felt that something going on? Was there any a challenge from the Jewish clientele?
So I had it's been so interesting because one of my dear friends, Sam Grunwald, is the consul general here in the state of Israel, here in Los Angeles, and we try to go and put together a 7th anniversary. And I went to all these stars asking them if they would support Israel and everything like that. And it's so amazing that they don't want to, a lot of people didn't want to give us the names. They didn't want to help us. And they're scared of maybe backlash in the industry, so they didn't want to talk. They didn't want to, they didn't want to lend their name to it. I found a lot of Hollywood actors because people are still scared. They're afraid.
Yeah, so it did have you did feel it in some way.
Sure, I felt it, and you feel it in I could say mid-America, I would feel it. I remember negotiating with some sports contracts, and a guy said to me, "You married a shiksha back there." They would make fun of me and things like that, but always in a jest and everything like that. But I think that overall, I never really had it. And the Jewish rockers, they knew what I was about. I'm right. I'm out front. I'm out front, and I'm not scared. And again, I think it was my dad. It's my dad, and accept me who I am. Hey, probably a lot of ball players didn't sign with me. I wasn't their type of guy. Maybe a lot of rockers didn't. I'm not a rock and roller. I say that in the film. I don't hang. Rabbi, you know how many of these managers became the managers for these big acts? They would hang with these artists. I don't hang.
Right? You get them concerts, which is
I
slightly
mean,
different.
yeah. Well, Ringo was so funny. One day he said it was so funny. He said to me, Ringo, he says, you don't. I remember he called me up. Oh, he calls me up. We're in London, and let's say the beautiful Dorchester Hotel. And he calls me up one day, and he says, Bob and I want to take you to dinner. And I said, okay, we're going to dinner. And I figured he was going to fire me. Why? Because I booked him at the Concord Hotel in the Catskills. I used to rehearse there. So the guy paid me and I booked the Beatles. Well, it was a front page of the Wall Street Journal, that Ringo Starr, Beatles working the Catskills, the same place where Shecky Green and Myron Cohen works. And so he said to me, dinner wasn't about that. He says, I just wanted to ask you, why did you call me? You never talked to me about the Beatles. You never talked to me about music. And I basically said, my brother had a Jewish rock band and you were his favorite. And I wanted to be in the band. So that was it.
It's funny. Andy just put on the question, which is really something I was reflecting on. The first time I came to the UK from Israel, and it was really the first time I realized I was Jewish when I came to the UK. And that sounds like a really funny thing, because I grew up went to yeshiva and everything like that, but I never realized I was Jewish, because everyone in Brooklyn was Jewish and everyone in Israel was Jewish. So I never realized I was Jewish until I arrived here, and suddenly I realized, wait, I'm Jewish, because you felt it. You feel you're Jewish in the UK, and in some ways we grew up where we hide our Judaism here, or I remember I was wearing a tallis once on Golders Green Road, and the frum person said to me, you don't do things like that in London. This isn't Jerusalem, this isn't Brooklyn, you don't act that way. And I wonder if your message of being proud of being a Jewish person doesn't resonate as much with a British crowd because of that mentality of keeping your head down.
Oh, so I was raised that way, but being the only from kid in Hackensack, New Jersey, or Brockton, Massachusetts, I wore the baseball hat. I remember Galveston, Texas, as a kid. My father was a chazan there. A kid threw a brick at my head, and anti-Semitism. My father walking to shul, we would get yelled at. Some guy yelled "dirty Jew." My father went running. He caught these kids. Years later in Hackensack, New Jersey, where he was a chaz, and he later passed away. There was a swastika put on the shul. I grew up in those areas as a kid, we were afraid to wear the yarmulke because we were afraid we were going to get hurt, or so our parents always told us to wear a baseball cap. Now I live in Los Angeles, and my kids were raised in the West Side in Manhattan. They don't notice that, and I tell them that all the time. You don't know what it is not to have a kosher restaurant. And eating out, when I lived in Hackensack, New Jersey, the eating out was going to YU to the cafeteria. That was the restaurant. So I was raised that way, and I get it. And you do feel that way, and you feel that way in a lot of cities. You go to Nashville and you go to Dallas, and thank God they're building these more and more communities. But I didn't. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy.
Yeah. Do you find, because although you're, especially now with your teenage kids, they're part of what we call mainstream, but do you feel still a bit of an odd fit, or are you ever reminded by the Beis Yaakov schools and stuff like that maybe you're not really one of us? Does that ever come up?
Well, I feel not one of us in the rock and roll community, because I'm really not one of them. They always think, no, people have been respectful because they're mainly sports fans, so they know that I've been sports, and I'm always, listen, I've gone out publicly in Sports Illustrated talking about, Shabbos. I've told everybody, so I've never had that problem. No, I really haven't, because I stay within the boundaries, and really, Rabbi, if I tell you, it's just more fun talking to your audience than I got to do a podcast related to the biggest guy in music, or I did one this morning, did an interview. My Yiddishkeit is it's where I feel comfortable. I want to go to Eretz Israel. If my dream is to live in Israel, and today with Zoom, we can do it. And it's where, so while I was raised in Hackensack and all these towns, I appreciate living in a foreign area. This is the first time, even in Manhattan, you don't feel like you're living in a Jewish community when you live in Manhattan. You
Mhm.
know, here in my neighborhood, I do. You get all these collectors coming by every day looking for money, but in Manhattan, they couldn't get into your apartment building.
Yeah, I remember when my wife was British, um, was visiting Brooklyn, and she went and took the subway, and she saw a Jew on it. She's like, "Oh, look, there's a Jew!" And then another one, then another one, then another one. You say, when you leave on the Belt Parkway, when you leave New York, it says "Oy vey." I mean, like literally, that
Right.
it's a different universe.
Totally.
Did you ever hear Brian Epstein come up from Ringo? Did that ever come up? Did you ever mention him?
Yeah, he talked about Epstein. He really liked Brian Epstein. Yeah, he liked Epstein. I don't know what Judaism he had, but everybody in England always thought that Ringo was Jewish, because there was an article in the Jewish newspaper there. But his wife Barbara was married. Her father was Jewish, and like I said, his business manager Hillary was raised Orthodox. And listen, all these, even Roger Waters, pisses me off. It upsets me because here the guy is just, he bashes everybody who tries to go to Israel, and his accountant is Jewish, his promoter is Jewish, and it's really wrong of what he's doing out there. But I don't know how anybody could support Pink Floyd's music, or really just him, because Nick Mason's a great guy.
Do we have any before we wrap up? Does anyone have any other questions? Any wannabe rockers or anyone who has
Well, yeah, I'd like to ask a question if I could. It's Peter Hammerman.
Please.
Yeah,
And by the
Peter.
way, before you ask a question, Peter, everybody, my email is david@rockcamp.com. That's my personal, david@rockcamp.com. And everyone can feel to write me, or if they have a son, or they have a child, or a grandson, or they have a family, or you want to ask me a question and you don't want to ask publicly, feel free. Because
Thank you very much. Your enthusiasm comes through, even on the Zoom screen, comes through very well. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to ask you, you speak a lot about Ringo Starr, but Ringo Starr didn't really, wasn't responsible for a lot of Beatles music. It was John Lennon and Paul McCartney. So what sort of music did Ringo do at these concerts? Was it mainly Beatles music or other music?
So Peter, first of all, Ringo had more number ones when he left the Beatles than the other guys. Don't Come Easy. He would sing Yellow Submarine. So I put these all-star bands together with all these artists. But he sang, on every album, he sang one song. And he would never do the other people's songs. But I remember that Peter Frampton said, "Can we do While My Guitar Gently Weeps?" And so he would let him do that. But Ringo's got a lot of hit songs that he recorded after the Beatles. And of course, the big hit was I Get Help with a little help with my friends. And so yeah, and he had and plus the bands, the shows has all these other hit songs. So he loves being in the band. I think that's why he tours. My favorite line, it's the Jackie Mason line. Someone always asks, the philosophy was like, Ringo, why do you tour? And Jackie Mason would say, when I'm on the road, I'm a Beatle. When I'm home, I'm a schmuck. My wife makes me throw out the trash. So that's what keeps all these artists on tour. They get to be, they're relevant when on the road. And so that's what keeps them all touring, because none of them need the money. Mick Jagger doesn't need the money. And there is a certain, like, a rabbi needs a pulpit, a rock star needs an audience, and everybody, that's what it is. And I have to share this with you, because my dad was a chazan and he did not want to retire. He didn't want to retire. So the president of the shul goes over to the president. He says, "You're going to negotiate my contract with my son. He's a famous agent." He says, "I know David very well. I even davened. I could daven Musaf. My father told me I davened Musaf Rosh Hashanah. I davened for him one year. He was sick, so I go see the head of the religious committee, and my dad was 80. He wanted another year on his contract, And so I walks in and he says, David, we can't even afford to pay the chazan. We pay the rabbi. Your father's making $10,000 a year. We don't have enough people in the shul in Hackensack, New Jersey. I said, listen, I'm going to write you a check for 10,000. You're going to double his salary next year. You're going to pay him. It's okay if you do that. We won't, because my dad didn't want to quit. I go home that night, and right afterwards, and I walk into the house, and my father says to me, no, what did they do with my contract? I said, Dad, I got him to double your contract. They're going to pay you 20,000 next year. And he turns to my mother in Yiddish. In Yiddish, she said he should have been my agent my entire career. So that's why they tour.
And one question for me, probably a very quick one. Do you play any instruments yourself?
I can't play an instrument. I tried. My brother, and I own this rock and roll fantasy camp, and I tried to play, and I'm really not good at it. And I wanted to be in the band, but my dad said, you know what? I tried. I was terrible. I played a little bass guitar, and he says, you go out and be an agent, and you can book 6 bands a night. And that was my father's idea why I got in the business.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Peter. Okay,
Can I just do one little thing?
Please, Valerie. Good to see Valerie, my mishpacha.
You never told them the funny story, what Ringo said when you were learning to film. Leave him alone because he's doing his thing. Remember?
Yeah, he was very very respectful. He is very respectful of it. And I think they all are. I mean, Roger Dolce called me up one day and says, can you get me the words in Yiddish for happy birthday? He has a dear friend of his. And we have a lot of we talk a lot about, I always got into religious talks with them. And I'll never forget that he had a show. He had a show at Jones Beach, and it was Shabbos was out, and to go out an hour to Jones Beach would have been too far, and they can't backstage. They can't see you. And I decided I'm going to go to the Catskills because I had a home up in the mountains, and I didn't want to show up to the show Saturday night. And Roger calls me on Friday, and he says to me, he says, "You're going to be in my show tomorrow night?" And I said, "No." I said, "It's too late after the Sabbath, and I won't make it." And he says, "Well, wait a minute." He says, "I was walking on 79th Street in Manhattan, and I asked the couple I saw this couple. I asked them what time does Sabbath start and when does it end, and they told him. And then he said the next thing they asked me is, do I need a meal? It's so funny, he's Albert Charlie started the company, so he says, I know what time Sabbath ended, so I've tried to use that excuse."
Thank you, Valerie. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this evening. Just a bit of a reflection. So you've been in discussion with Rabbi Nick Kett, our community rabbi, who brought you in to join us. So first of all, big yashikayach to Rabbi Nick for being the agent or the scout that found you and brought you to share with us. An interesting thing about Rabbi Nick Kett and myself, he's the musical one of the two of us. He's a very, very beautiful voice and leads many of our services, and just generally really fantastic. I'm the wannabe. I'm the one. I play guitar, and I have these great aspirations in my mind of what I wish I could be. If only I can do what they do, only I could do. And I'll tell you what's interesting about tonight. This is the first time where things have been spun around, where rather than you extolling the how amazing those who are the rock stars and what they've accomplished, but actually kind of saying your aspirations for yourself, for your children, your grandchildren, etc., is for them to rock Jewishly, which is really such a beautiful thing, and it doesn't mean my fantasies are going to go away. Maybe I'll join you in rock camp one day.
Please,
but,
you gotta come.
Yeah, but it does help us all realize that the highest aspirations really should be to rock Jewishly in all that we do, and for those who feel they've passed it already, or remember, Ringo Starr still went on after his time with the Beatles, after his number ones, to have the all-star band, and there's no reason why we should feel we have to stop rocking Jewishly because we've reached a certain age, or obviously to pass on those messages as well to our loved ones also. So David, you've really been so fascinating, and what a fascinating life, and what great lessons to learn from it. So thank you very much for joining us, and for sharing with us, and we wish you lots of continued success, especially with the movie which is coming out, which I really hope is successful also. A really great evening. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And my email address, someone asked for it now, it's david@rockcamp.com. And I hope when I come to London, I plan to come. I hope I'll come spend Shabbos with you guys.
Please,
And
God.
it'd be my honor.
Wonderful. Really, really exciting. Okay, just guys, before we wrap up, just a word on what's coming up going forward in the community with everything happening with Purim. So just a few final words as well. So just hold on one second.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to say goodbye.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night, Karen.
Thank you.
Karen.
Okay. So just to conclude, before we wrap up, for any of you who like live music and love a bit of bingo and like to win some really cool prizes, we have our first ever Bushy virtual bingo extravaganza taking place on Thursday night, the 25th of February. You have to register ahead of time, but it's going to be a great evening. Loads of really exciting prizes, live music, virtually live music from the show band, and it begins at 8:30 p.m. After you've had a chat, and you'll be able to order dinner that you can enjoy as part of the Purim festivities as well. Really exciting. In the run-up to that, we're inviting you to join us in the British Museum virtually. Dr. Rafi Zaram will be presenting a tour of the British Museum of the Purim evidence and artifacts that will be taking place next Wednesday night, 1 week's time at 8:30 p.m. On Thursday, the day after, we have a talk from Baroness Roz Altman along with Jeffrey Hartnell on investments, pensions, and COVID. What do we need to know? And that's also taking place at 8:30 p.m. It is a different sign up. All you need to do is check out our newsletter on Facebook or other things of being able to take part. Loads coming up. Really great to share with everyone this evening, and wishing everyone a wonderful night and a very safe drive home. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Lovely. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Good Shabbos for
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Encore Friday.